Hey there, and welcome back to Clear Path Conversations. I'm Mark Bernardin. In the last episode, we talked about internal advocacy and how to capture your wins without sounding like you're bragging. We covered how to document your impact, manage up effectively, and make sure that your work gets the visibility that it deserves. Today, we're talking about something that doesn't get discussed enough in customer success, and that's burnout. Not the kind where you've had a rough week. The kind that shows up gradually, quietly, and can derail even your best CSMs if you don't know how to spot it early on. I'm approaching this from two angles. The first is, as someone who's mentored dozens of CSMs through this. And second, as someone who's built teams where burnout is treated as a systemic issue, not as a personal failing. Because here's the truth. Burnout in CS isn't about weakness. It's about structure. And the way that CS work is designed, it creates conditions that lead directly to exhaustion if you don't build in countermeasures. And the best CSMs are often the most vulnerable because they're the ones who care enough to push themselves past those sustainable limits. Let me tell you about Sarah. It's not her real name, but she was a CSM that I mentored at Palo Alto Networks. On paper, she was absolutely crushing it. Portfolio health scores off the charts. Renewals just tracking perfectly. Leadership loved her. The customers all trusted her. But I noticed something in our weekly one-on-one meetings. She'd mention working late to finish up documentation. She'd talk about checking emails on the weekends and just to stay ahead. She would describe customer situations with language that shifted from engaged to more mechanical. Just little things. Easy to miss, actually, if you're not really paying attention. But one day, she said something that really caught my attention. She said, I closed that renewal, but honestly, I just felt relieved that it was over. I didn't feel good about it. And that's the moment I knew that we needed to talk about burnout. Not because she was failing, she wasn't, but because she was succeeding in a way that it wasn't sustainable. Here's what burnout actually looks like in customer success. It shows up in three specific patterns. The first way is emotional exhaustion. And this isn't just your normal tiredness. It's coming home from a day of customer calls and having nothing left for anything else. It's avoiding scheduling interactions because the idea of being present, it just feels impossible. It's going through your emails on autopilot instead of actually processing what the customers really need. The second is depersonalization. You start treating customer interactions more as tasks to complete instead of relationships that are there to nurture. The work becomes mechanical. You're executing processes without being genuinely engaged. Customers, they become company names in your CRM instead of people you're serving. Third is a reduced sense of accomplishment. Even when you're hitting your metrics, it just doesn't feel meaningful. You close a renewal and think, so what? I'll just have to do this again next quarter. The wins that used to energize you feel hollow. They feel empty. Now, if you're experiencing all three, you're not just stressed, you're burned out. And that requires a different response than just taking a few days off. Now, here's what makes customer success particularly vulnerable. That work never ends. Every account you rescue just creates new maintenance work. Every renewal just resets the clock. You own outcomes that you can't fully control. You're accountable for retention, but you don't control the product roadmap or the support response times. The emotional labor is invisible. Nobody sees the work you do to de-escalate a tense stakeholder or to maintain composure during challenging situations. That's not a personal problem. That's a structural problem. And it requires structural solutions. So let's talk about what actually works. These are the practices that I taught Sarah, and the practices that I've implemented across every CS team that I've built or led. First, audit your emotional labor. Most CSMs dramatically underestimate how much emotional work they're actually doing. So for 1 week, track every interaction where you had to consciously manage your emotional response. Calls where you stayed calm under pressure. Emails where you reframed bad news positively. Or meetings where you absorb stress without showing any of your own. Just count them. Now, when Sarah did this, she realized she was having 15 to 20 of these interactions a week. Now, she'd been thinking it was maybe 4 or 5. That gap matters. If you're not acknowledging the work, you can't recover from it. Second, build in recovery rituals. Just small, consistent practices between those high-intensity interactions. After a difficult customer call, physically stand up. Walk to get a drink of water. Step outside for 2 minutes. The specific practice matters less than the consistency. You're creating circuit breakers so stress doesn't compound. Some CSMs use breathing exercises, like box breathing for a few minutes. 4 counts in, hold for 4, 4 counts out, hold for 4. It activates your parasympathetic nervous system, and it interrupts the stress response. Others have a context switch task. Just 20 minutes of mechanical work like data entry or document updates in the CRM. Just something productive but calming. The key is to protect that time like you protect your customer calls. If your calendar is back to back to back to back meetings with no recovery time built in, you're just set up for that accumulated stress. Now, third, redefine your success metrics. If you only measure yourself by account health scores and your renewal rates, you're basing your sense of accomplishment on things that you can't fully control. A customer can experience a merger or budget cuts or an executive turnover. You can do everything right and still see negative outcomes. Instead, measure what you can actually control. Did you respond to escalations professionally? Did you document risks clearly? Build strong stakeholder relationships? Or execute your processes consistently? Those are things you own completely. Now, I had Sarah start what we called a wins journal. Not just big wins, but the smaller wins too. De-escalated a tense situation, and noticed a risk early and we flagged it. Maintained composure during a challenging call. Followed through on commitments when she was overwhelmed. That's the real work of customer success. And when she was questioning whether anything mattered, she could see concrete, real evidence of her impact. Now, fourth, establish hard boundaries. This one's tough. This is where most CSMs struggle because we're conditioned to be responsive, but constant availability isn't sustainable. Define clear working hours and protect them. Train customers and stakeholders to respect them. Some things will wait until tomorrow. And that's not just okay, it's necessary. When Sarah set boundaries, something interesting happened. Her customer relationships got stronger because she was more present during the time that she was working. She wasn't showing up to calls distracted or already exhausted. She wasn't responding to emails with half of her attention. She was fully engaged because she protected her capacity to be engaged. Fifth, build peer support networks. CS work can be isolating. You're on an island. You need colleagues who understand the specific challenges. People you can debrief with after difficult calls. People who validate that, yeah, that situation was challenging, and no, you're not overreacting. Sarah started meeting weekly with a couple other CSMs. They would share strategies, remind each other that they weren't alone. That support doesn't necessarily solve problems, but it does make those problems bearable. Sixth, advocate for systemic changes. This is crucial. Individual coping strategies do help, but they don't address the root causes. If your portfolio is unreasonably large, that's a structural problem. If your team is chronically understaffed, that's not something better time management is going to fix. Come to your manager with data. Portfolio size compared to industry benchmarks, time required for core responsibilities, specific proposals for addressing gaps. Maybe that's hiring additional CSMs. Maybe it's better tools. Maybe it's adjusted segmentation. Frame it around enabling better customer outcomes, not just reducing workload. Now, Now let's talk about prevention. The best way to handle burnout is building practices that prevent it. Systematize the routine work. Templates for common communications, checklists for onboarding, frameworks for assessing health. The more you systematize, the less mental energy you spend on those routine decisions. That frees up capacity for more strategic thinking. And protect time for deep work. Really block it on your calendar. Treat it as a non-negotiable. If you're only working in firefighting reactive mode, you're always going to be behind. And that creates chronic stress. Also, celebrate invisible wins. Most CS work doesn't show up on dashboards. You de-escalated a situation before it became a problem. You built trust with a skeptical stakeholder. You documented a risk that helped leadership make better decisions. Acknowledge that work. Also, maintain role boundaries. You're not support. You're not sales. You're not product. When other teams try to shift their work onto you, throw it over that fence, push back. When customers expect you to function as their help desk, redirect them. Protecting your role boundaries protects your capacity. Also, invest in your development. Growth is one of the best antidotes to burnout. It reminds you that you're building capabilities that increase your options and effectiveness. Here's what happened with Sarah. She implemented these practices gradually, not all at once. She started with recovery rituals and setting boundaries. And then we worked on the wins journal. Then the peer support network. So over 3 months, I watched her transform. Not from someone who was failing to someone who was succeeding. She was already knocking it out of the park. But from someone who was succeeding in an unsustainable way to someone who was succeeding sustainably. Her metrics didn't drop. If anything, they improved slightly because she was more focused during work hours. Her customer relationships deepened because she was more present. And she started proactively identifying and mentoring other CSMs who were showing those early warning signs of burnout. That's what sustainable CS performance looks like. It's not about working less or lowering your standards. It's about working in ways that let you maintain high standards over time, instead of just oscillating between heroic performance and exhausted mediocrity. When I build CS teams now, burnout prevention is built right into the operating model. Reasonable portfolio sizes, protected time for strategic work, regular check-ins focused on workload sustainability, peer support as part of the culture, recognition for that invisible work. Those aren't nice to haves. They're requirements for long-term team performance. Because here's what I've learned across over now 11 years in customer success leadership. Teams that treat burnout as a personal weakness, they lose their best people. But teams that treat it as a systemic issue to manage build sustainable excellence. So if you're experiencing burnout right now, here's what I want you to know. You're not weak. You're not failing. You're responding normally to conditions that just aren't sustainable. And there are concrete things you can do to change your situation. Start with one practice, just one. Build a recovery ritual. Set a boundary. Start that wins journal. Track your emotional labor for a week. Don't try to boil the ocean and fix everything at once. Just small changes that compound. Or if you're a manager and you're seeing these signs in your team members, don't wait for them to burn out and leave. Have that conversation early. Create space for them to implement these sustainable practices. Advocate for structural changes that make the work manageable. Customer success is a marathon. The only way to run a marathon is to pace yourself. The CSMs who last aren't the ones who sprint the hardest. They're the ones who build sustainable pace and protect it. Now, in our next episode, we're moving into a new mini-series on advanced relationship management. We're going to be talking about stakeholder mapping, especially when everyone changes, how to navigate turnover, reorgs, and new power structures without starting from scratch every time your primary contact leaves. So, until then, take an honest assessment of where you are. If you're seeing the 3 signs of burnout, that's valuable feedback and information. It doesn't mean that you're weak. It just means that you need to change something. Pick one practice from this episode and implement it this next week. So follow the show wherever you listen to podcasts. Visit clearpathcx.com for the frameworks and resources, and connect with me on LinkedIn at linkedin.com/in/Mark Bernardin. Thank you for being here. Thank you for doing this work. And thank you for showing up and delivering every single day. I'll talk to you soon.